Thank you for joining us today here on Connect and Collaborate, where we come together each day to introduce you to our network of business and community leaders and to discuss important issues that impact business in Colorado and the region. I'm Tammy Schaefer, your on-air producer, and today we're connecting with Vital for Colorado. Peter Moore, Chairman and CEO of Vital for Colorado, is with us today. And Peter, it's really great to have you here again.
Well, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
Here it is in 2018. We're here again, and very, very happy to have a friend and a prior guest back, Cathy Proctor, the Denver Business Journal. And boy, there's a lot to talk about. And just a little background, and I'll ask Cathy to also give a little background. But for those who don't know, she's been a reporter for the Denver Business Journal close to 17 years. And prior to that, she was reporter with the Rocky Mountain News, and then she was communications person prior to that. Northwestern graduate, and welcome. Happy New Year.
Thank you so much for having me back, and Happy New Year to you as well.
Well, thanks a lot. How was your 2017?
2017 was really, really busy. We saw a lot of activity here in the oil and gas sector and the energy sector across Colorado, and it's going to be another busy year this year.
Yeah.
So as far as being a reporter, I know that you're the energy reporter, but you have other responsibilities too, don't you?
I do. My main beat is energy, and we take that from the ground to the cloud, actually. And so I cover oil and gas, plus wind and solar, and all aspects of that energy, up to and including Xcel Energy.
Right.
So it's policy, it's the businesses, it's the financing, regulations, and just what companies are doing, who's doing what, and how that's going.
Well, the energy industry has been very political, and that's really almost the genesis of Vital for Colorado. We were formed in 2013, and I was one of the founders of it. And our intent is to try to organize the voice of business. We're run by a 15-person board of directors and a great number of Chamber of Commerce folks and a few of the other businesses. But I've been watching it closely, I think, now since the fall of 2013. And I think 2017 was a fairly wild ride. And if my tea leaves are correct, I think 2018 will be even more contentious, let's just put it that way.
I think the seeds are planted. We'll see what happens.
So we'll talk about that, I think, in our other segments. But why don't you give us a little bit of perspective over what you've seen in your time in covering the energy beat. I sort of gave you my perspective of what I think it's been the last 4 years, but what's your perspective? How has it changed over the years?
Well, one thing that's so interesting about the energy beat is that it has changed. When I first started at the Denver Business Journal in 2000, it was pretty much Colorado in general. It was pretty much all about oil and gas. And in fact, at that time, most of the activity was happening on the western slope with the Piceance Basin and a pure play natural gas play. And we didn't have a lot of wind. I still remember the first wind farm that was approved in the early 2000s and just how contentious that was.
Right.
And we had virtually no solar. I think the best that we could do is I remember my father having some thermal hot water on the roof of our house on the south side of Denver. But you fast forward to today, and we have thousands of megawatts worth of wind on the system. The solar numbers just continue to tick up. And here in the last couple of years, we've really seen the redevelopment, the revitalization of the Denver-Julesburg Basin. And that's the one that's just north of Denver, goes up to the state lines, Weld County, and a lot of new technology, a lot of new players, and that's been truly, truly interesting to watch.
Well, really, for all three of those areas, I view it as a story of innovation and technology, and obviously investment fueling that. But there's been so much innovation really since about 2014, since the economic downturn in prices. And from my perspective, people they had to become more efficient, and they sure did. And as a result, the methods of extracting oil and gas have changed dramatically even since 2014, and then to wind and solar is becoming more and more efficient. The cost per megawatt hour is coming down. It's becoming more competitive. And then I've had some people from the wind industry, and they explain that they're really symbiotic with the natural gas industry, with natural gas plants, that they can't exist without the fast-firing plants. And so it's really kind of one big circle, and it's exciting how it's changing. And oftentimes when people want to fight about things, they just sort of look at things in a very static way, and they say things are this way or that way, and because of that, they have an opinion. But the facts change all the time.
They do. And I think another just avenue, just a little pitch for us, the Denver Business Journal has also changed over that time. We are a business journal. We focus in on business. We have a wider circulation here in the Denver metro area than the Wall Street Journal.
Right.
So if folks are looking for local business news, the Denver Business Journal is where it's at. And when I started, we were purely Wednesday deadlines, Friday publication on a weekly paper. And then this internet thing came along, and we have gone from pure play print to print as well as online. We have 2 newsletters a day that basically are our papers. We put out one in the morning, put out another one out in the afternoon, and in between time, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. The flow of news is just constant. And with all that innovation, we've also seen just a thirst. And I think we've really seen that in this last year or two, a real thirst for good, reliable information. And that's something that the Denver Business Journal prides itself on. We have the bench of reporters that we have out there looking at their beats, years of experience.
Well, I'm a subscriber and just have a few seconds, but give you a pitch for the DBJ. I've subscribed for many years. I think it's essential for any business person that's interested in facts and policy. And kudos to your entire team, because it's become a very good online platform.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We're talking today with Peter Moore, Chairman and CEO of Vital for Colorado, and his guest is Cathy Proctor, reporter for the Denver Business Journal, covering energy and transportation. We'll be back with more. Stay with us after this break here on Connect and Collaborate, the voice of the Colorado Business Roundtable. Thank you so much for staying with us today on Connect and Collaborate. Today, our co-host is Peter Moore, Chairman and CEO of Vital for Colorado, and his guest is Cathy Proctor, a reporter from the Denver Business Journal.
Thanks a lot, Tammy. Cathy, in terms of 2017, the 2 things that just jumped to me in terms of major developments during the year would be, I guess, events in Broomfield. First of all, Extraction, which is an oil and gas developer, had been working with the city council in the city of Broomfield for a long time. To develop a new memorandum of understanding, which is one of the mechanisms to allow local control. So these are contracts and agreements actually developed by the developers and the city. And the best result, as a contract lawyer myself, is when the parties agree and can put it in writing. And they were successful. And so that's called an MOU, or Memorandum of Understanding. And then only, I think about 10 days after that, there was an election where Question 301 was passed, I think, by 50% of the people. And maybe you could tell me, in whichever order you prefer, what is happening in Broomfield, because it confuses me.
Well, you are absolutely right. One of the most fascinating stories of 2017 has been watching what happened in Broomfield. Now, Broomfield is a brand new city, fairly, here in the state of Colorado. They were only formed in 2001, and they have some experience with oil and gas going back decades. I mean, we're talking wells that were drilled in the early 1990s. But the city has changed. There's a lot of new residents coming in, a lot of new development, and at the same time you have a brand new company, Extraction Oil and Gas, which itself was only formed in 2012. And
so they're all new.
Everybody's new, and what we saw here in 2017 was a new way of working with a city, between an oil and gas company and the city. We saw a new company trying new techniques. They're bringing in some electric rigs and some quiet fracking fleet. And then you are absolutely right. And then there was this whiplash thing with ballot Measure 301, which essentially was approved and gives the city authority over oil and gas operations.
So I think of it in terms of a very good development, and then 301 I view as very bad development. Let's actually talk about the good first.
Yeah, the good is good. I mean, again, this is a groundbreaking situation. Extraction Oil and Gas worked with the city for well over, I think 2 years at this point. They have a strategy as a company to go in and do some development in fairly tight quarters. Has been their pattern over the last couple of years. So they set up drilling rigs and well pads that are fairly near to communities. That touches off a lot of tension very, very quickly, especially when you're in a community like Broomfield, which has not seen a drilling rig.
Right.
And is full of people who haven't seen a drilling rig. Even the locals haven't seen one, and the newcomers haven't seen one either. So they came in, they have a fairly large area that they want to drill, and they went to the city and said, here's how we want to do it.
Well, one of the major conflicts between the subsurface rights and the folks that live on the surface, which be homeowners and citizens, is noise. Mm-hmm. And when people think about a drilling rig, they say, holy cow, you're putting an industrial operation. Well, first of all, it's only during the period of time that it's drilled, and then when it's drilled, the drill is taken away. But even during that time period, under the old diesel electric drills,
they're noisy.
They're very noisy. And I seem to recall in other communities north of Denver articles about that topic, about how loud and decibel levels.
Oh yeah,
But this sort of takes one of the issues off the table, doesn't it?
It does. Noise is typically a routine. It's one of the top complaints about oil and gas across the state if you talk to the state regulators. And what extraction has done, in fact what the industry has done, so they're not alone in this. They may be using it, they may be driving it, but they are not alone in this. They have brought out some electric rigs. So instead of those old noisy diesel engines, they are hooking into, they have electric rigs that are running them. They're actually hooking into those high-line power lines that are overhead. Things are quiet. I haven't actually seen one, but I've heard about it. Basically what people tell me is that they hop out of the car, they look at the drilling rig, and they're like, oh, I guess it's not running right now. But it is. And it's driving. So, you're absolutely right. Drilling is noisy. Fracking also is noisy because, again, we're using a lot of diesel compression stations, and this is just the way it is. But extraction went to another Denver company by the name of Liberty Oil Field Services. I got that right.
Chris Wright's company.
Chris Wright's company, and said, it has to be quieter. We are working near people. We recognize that. We don't want to annoy them if we can avoid it. Make it quiet. They did. Took them 2 years. 2 years of taking stuff apart, putting it back together, wrapping insulation around the whole thing. But it's quiet, and I have been out to a quiet fleet location, and we were standing just about 50 feet from the sound walls. And I had my little iPad, and I was talking to somebody, and I could hear him. He could hear me. It was just really, really amazing to see what has happened there.
And I think there also were agreements to change some of the setbacks in certain areas with regard to that. Is that something that you know about, or no?
I'm not sure what you're talking about there.
As far as the MOU, and I might be incorrect in this, but I thought that some of the distances had changed in the MOU. I thought there were agreements like 750 feet, for example.
I think all the plan with extraction has gone through a number. Extraction's plan with Broomfield went through a number of iterations, which goes to its willingness to talk to the community, to listen to the community, and to change its plans based on that input, which is fabulous. Everybody's truly, truly interested in that. In the end, I think all of their pads are at least 1,000 feet away from a home, including homes that are in Adams County. There was a little kerfluffle right at the end where Adams County residents were like, whoa, wait a minute. Because extraction was listening to Broomfield and moving things around for Broomfield, things got moved closer to residents in Adams County.
Right.
It's one of those conundrums that we have here in Colorado, we have nationwide. If you move it far away from someone, chances are pretty good you're going to move it closer to someone else.
Well, I probably didn't ask the right question the most artful way, but the real point is that the city and the developer agreed upon a set of rules for development.
They did.
And that was really just before the election.
They did.
And you would think that people would say, isn't that great? What happened at the election?
What happened at the election was, I think, a reaction to all of the controversy that this plan had engendered in the community. There were folks in the community who just don't think that oil and gas drilling can be done responsibly, safely near their homes. They believe that, and they want something in place that will protect their homes. So they wrote up what ultimately is ballot initiative number 301. In general, it gives the city the authority to regulate oil and gas in a way that makes sure that anything that the city approves does not adversely impact the health, safety, and welfare of animals, people, and the environment. Now, there's two pieces to this, and I think that that's important to recognize.
I didn't realize animals, people, and the environment.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, when you talk to the people who actually were behind this in the city, and they say, we just want oil and gas done safely, and if it can't be done safely, then it shouldn't be done. How can you be against that? Well, it's okay. And most people that I talk to in the industry, outside of the industry, well, in fact, everybody's in favor of safety. Everybody's in favor of the environment. Everybody's in favor of people. It's the language that comes before that gives the city the authority to regulate oil and gas. That puts the city ahead of the state. And according to the attorneys who have watched this conflict, it's the conflict over local control. It's played out across Colorado for years and years and years. The attorneys are all focused on the first part of that, which gives the city control over where oil and gas is done and how it's done in the city. They say it's in violation of state law. The people who want it say, how can you be against this? All we're trying to do is protect our people. So it's a conflict.
Fairly well drafted. I think there's a slippery word in there, such as plenary authority.
There is.
And
you're the attorney. I had to ask what that meant.
That is the best kind of authority. It's primary authority, superseding authority.
I want that authority.
And it's the kind of authority that you want. But the problem is that the year prior, there were two Colorado Supreme Court cases, which many people, including myself, believe stated very clearly on the basis of state law preemption that the state authority have control and rights over matters of statewide concern.
Yes.
And development of oil and gas resources, matters of statewide concern.
Yep.
There's local control that's permitted under the regulations enacted by the state, so it doesn't mean that only the state weighs in, but the state has primary authority. And then, again, from my perspective, and I think the attorneys that you're talking about in your reporting are telling you that direct conflict.
Yep.
And usually there's a direct conflict between a new question for the city of Broomfield that's directly contrary to the law established by the Colorado Supreme Court. It seems to me that the Supreme Court would win.
Well, I think that from what I've been told, a lawsuit will be brought. It will be tested in court. It was predicted before. It hasn't happened yet. And that's all I can say. That is, it hasn't happened yet. I'm told that there will be lawsuits filed. And you're absolutely right. This is a decision that has been visited in Colorado courts more than once.
Yeah.
And more than once they've decided in favor of the state.
We'll be back with more with Vital for Colorado. Peter Moore, Chairman and CEO of Vital for Colorado, is our co-host today, and Cathy Proctor, Energy and Transportation Reporter with the Denver Business Journal, is his guest. Stay with us. We'll have more after this break. Staying with us today for Connect and Collaborate, and we are connecting with Vital for Colorado today with Peter Moore, Chairman and CEO of Vital for Colorado, and your guest today is Cathy Proctor, reporter from the Denver Business Journal.
Well, thanks a lot, Tammy. So let's move from Broomfield to east of Denver. I think that you wrote an article at the very end of December of last year about continued development on the Denver metro area on the east side. What's going on?
Well, that is just a fascinating story that's going on out east of there. Now, there's been oil and gas there, again, for decades and decades, but it's it's been kind of slow, really slow, not much going on at all over the past 5 or 6 years. ConocoPhillips was the first company that came in back in 2012. They purchased mineral rights under the old Lowry bombing range,
Right.
which itself is historic here in Denver. It's where the Army used to practice bombs and bombing runs and how to deal with that. Funny story about that. We've talked so much about the industry's dedication to safety. I did do a tour with ConocoPhillips back in 2012, 2013, when I asked to see what they were up to out there. And they said sure. They took me out to their headquarters out there, fairly far east. They put me in a room. They had one of their senior safety officers put me through a PowerPoint presentation and oral talk to me all about how to be safe out there, how to stay with the people, stay where I'm supposed to go, wear all of my safety equipment. And when I was through with that, I was allowed to get in a company car and drive on public roads. We never actually got out onto site. But I tell that story because I have been startled and impressed with the level of care and attention to safety that I've seen throughout my time covering this industry. But to your question, what's going on out there? We're going to see a lot more activity in 2018 than we have seen for a long time in this sector. And by east of Denver, I'm talking about Aurora on the east side, east of E470. I'm talking about Adams County, and I'm also talking about Arapahoe County. And there's some things going on out there. Now, ConocoPhillips has quietly drilled about 45 wells out there already over the past couple of years, again, since they got the mineral rights in 2012. And Extraction Oil and Gas, we talked about them in Broomfield. They have moved in and just gotten a large position with something that they're calling the Hawkeye position.
Okay.
So they have great plans for this area. And at the same time, I think the political conflict that we have seen about oil and gas is also going to be spinning up here in Aurora. They just had an election in November, and the people who have been involved politically with money and candidates were involved in this one. Vital for Colorado was one of them, and the other one, Conservation Colorado. Both sides backed candidates. Some candidates won, some candidates lost.
Yeah, and it was a tough election. I don't think either position could claim a victory. It was truly mixed.
It was truly mixed, but it's also an indication of just what's coming. There's dozens of permits. If you look on the website for the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, the state agency that oversees the industry, you can see dozens of permits have been requested and granted. The city of Aurora itself has already reviewed a lot of permits, mostly from ConocoPhillips here over the last 6 months, 8 months. And Extraction's executives said that they like what they see. So this is an area that has not seen a lot of drilling over the last couple of years, and it's going to see a lot more. It's also going to see a lot of growth too, though.
When permits are granted to a company and they then have the right to do it, things kind of change because the property rights for those people change by virtue of the granting of the permits. But and then I think that a very, very significant development is also, I guess, I don't know if it was the end of the last week of December, the first week of January, it's probably last week of December, was the filing of the setback measure for 2,500 feet, which I think we saw 2 years ago.
We did. Back in 2016, we did see a measure to have a setback between oil and gas operations and homes and other things of 2,500 feet. Now, Colorado already has a setback. Our setback is 500 feet from between an oil and gas well and an occupied home. If it's a school or a hospital or something where a larger group are concentrated, it's 1,000 feet. But this actually goes to 2,500 feet, 2.5 times even what it's supposed to be for a school, 5 times what it's supposed to be for a house. And it's written, again, we saw this in 2016. They gathered, the folks who supported it at that time gathered signatures. They did turn them into the Secretary of State's office. They were reviewed. The Secretary of State said that they did not have enough valid signatures in order to be put on the 2016 ballot. So that's what happened then. The same initiative, from my read of it, is back. And when I talked to the supporters, I asked, what's the difference here? And they said there's a couple differences. Number one, this is a statutory amendment.
Right, yeah.
And I'll talk about that in a minute. And the second thing is they said they have decided that they need to start earlier in the year to gather signatures, and also work more collaboratively with other groups who are interested in this. So that will be very, very interesting. The other thing that'll be very, very interesting in this is that last year we had Raise the Bar. And Raise the Bar, again, Vital was a big supporter of this, as was a lot of the business community, is a change on constitutional amendments. A decision was made by the supporters that it was too easy. It was too easy to actually get a ballot measure on Colorado's ballot before the voters and change the state's constitution. And once you change the state's constitution, it's super hard to change it back.
Well, one of the advocates, I recall using the phrase, and I'm tired of Colorado being the petri dish for change, and I think Colorado had the third greatest number of constitutional changes over the last 20 years.
Mm-hmm. I heard that phrase myself. Mm-hmm. And so it made it harder to get on the ballot. However, so there's two types of amendments, constitutional or statutory. Constitutional, again, changes the Constitution, super hard to do. Now it's super hard to attempt to do. However, there's still another avenue, statutory. And so they have come back with a statutory amendment, which it would be simply a change in the law. And if it gets passed, it can be passed by a simple majority. And it is a little weaker. Remember how I said the constitutional amendments were super hard to change because you had to go back to the voters? Well, with statutory, the legislature can change it, again, with a simple majority. They don't need to wait. There's no cooling off period. But it also raises questions about can the legislature actually change it? Would they change it if it is passed?
Well, we'll talk about in our final segment some of the economic dangers of that. I'm sorry. I said we have a little more time than I thought. So
exactly.
You mentioned 2,500 feet, but that's actually a radius. It's a circle.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, 2,500 feet is, I think.
It's really hard to visualize. But if you take all the circles, and what are these circles from? These circles are from homes and schools. That's good, but also vulnerable areas.
And there is, I have it right in front of me. There is an extensive list of what qualifies as a vulnerable area: playgrounds, sports fields, lakes, rivers, reservoirs, irrigation canals, creeks. I grew up here in Colorado. I grew up on the south side of Denver, near a place called Dry Creek. It's called Dry Creek for a reason.
And I live in Hunters Hill, right by a little dry creek. And what is a dry creek bed in Colorado, do you suppose?
Well, I think
Could you identify one if you walked over it?
I think it probably would depend on the time of year.
Yeah.
If you walk across a dry creek bed after a gully washer, it's going to be water running. Ultimately, it could totally shut down oil and gas drilling across 90% of the state.
Wow, great points. I appreciate all of this conversation with Peter Moore, Chairman and CEO of Vital for Colorado, and Cathy Proctor, Energy and Transportation Reporter for the Denver Business Journal. We'll be back with more right after this. We're so glad you're staying with us today here on Connect and Collaborate. We are connecting with Vital for Colorado with Peter Moore and his guest, Cathy Proctor, reporter for the Denver Business Journal.
Well, Cathy, you mentioned a figure just as we were winding out in the last segment, and it is I think, a shocking figure, and this relates to the 2,500-foot setback measure, which was filed really just a few days before the beginning of the new year. And we explained that 2,500 is a radius and really are circles with a 2,500-foot radius. But you said, and that'll shut down 90%. Who says that of future production for the oil and gas industry in the entire state?
Well, this goes back to 2016 when the same identical ballot measure was proposed. Similar, I
Right.
guess I should say similar. And at the time, the state officials in charge of oil and gas took a look at what that meant. They took a look at a 2,500-foot setback. As you said correctly, it's a radius around a point that can be a home, it can be a sports field, it can be a creek, a dry creek bed, a wet creek bed, a wetland.
It could be an open space.
It could be an open space. And once you start drawing those circles,
Yeah.
2,500 foot around this, 2,500 foot around this, 2,500 foot around this, the state found that it would effectively ban new oil and gas wells from 90% of the state. So imagine that, everywhere that you pretty much see a drilling rig right now, you would not see one.
Do you know from your reporting approximately what the gross domestic product impact is in the state of Colorado? It's very, it's in the tens of billions of dollars, I think.
Well, it's interesting if you want to run simple math. The industry is a $31 billion a year industry.
Right.
You take away, there's a certain portion of that is dedicated toward existing wells, but there's a lot of activity on new wells. So $31 billion, 90%, you're looking at a drop that's super significant. Plus the jobs. There's jobs that are wrapped up in this new oil and gas wells. About 100,000 people work in the industry right now, both directly and indirectly. And again, simple math, you can take those jobs away and move them someplace else. And that's a critical factor. Moving it someplace else. The energy companies have options, and especially with the new technology that we've seen here, put to use here in Colorado, there are other places that they can go and they can drill and they can invest.
And just using logic, if you own a company and you are not permitted to develop your permits, your rights, because of this new setback requirement, which is totally different than anything you've seen before and totally different, what do? I mean, how can you stay in the state? How can you employ anybody if you can't develop anything?
I think the business executives that I've talked to would take a very cold-hearted look at their future here in the state if this was implemented. But we're not there yet. They have to gather signatures. They have to get on the ballot. The voters have to take a look at it. So there would be consequences if it is approved.
Well, this was a very, very big issue back in 2016, and I see that playing out again in 2018. And it's exactly the same threat. And it is truly cataclysmic, I think, for the state of Colorado. And that's, in a certain way, it's really almost the genesis of the formation of Auto for Colorado, is that this affects every single business. If you take a $31 billion vertical away from the state, take for 100,000 jobs, this state goes into a depression from my perspective. And I'm not really looking for your opinion on that, but...
well, and I wanted to throw one more number at
Yeah.
you, and that is the fact that we do produce oil and gas here in the state of Colorado. A lot of the homes here in Colorado do rely on natural gas for heat, for electricity. It's used for electricity. And so being virtually on the doorstep of a major supply, there are also economic consequences of that that come in the form of cheaper energy bills. Cheaper energy bills mean that people have more money to spend elsewhere. They can buy a new car, they can go out to dinner, they can watch movies. So the consequences, just ripple through the economy in both ways.
So much more than just the direct impact of taking the $31 billion vertical away and 100,000 jobs, because if you think of some of the alternatives of energy, which is growing and growing in terms of wind and solar, they are dependent upon the natural gas power plants we have. And I guess we'd have to buy our oil and gas from someplace else, and that very big refinery and a little bit north of Denver, those people have to work someplace else. Or else ship it in, refine it there, I guess. That's the idea.
It's the way business works.
Well, it's a crazy initiative, and if it gets through the various hurdles and as it gets on the ballot, we'll be talking a lot more about that. Why don't you tell us about a few of the other articles you've written recently? Let's talk about federal tax overhaul. I see you wrote an article again in December. You're a very busy person in December, lots of articles. what's going on with regard to federal tax overhaul for energy sectors?
Well, as you know, there was a very large tax overhaul, and I think that the top line information for businesses and for the energy business is the cut in the corporate tax rate down to 21%. So that is just spread across all businesses and includes oil and gas, wind and solar as well. The reform also did good things for the wind and solar industry in the form that the final form was not the original form. What initially came through the House was a cut to the federal tax credit for wind power. Solar was also affected, and what the proposal was to go back on a previous agreement that would step down the federal tax credit for the wind industry, and everybody had agreed to it. Business decisions were made on it, and the House proposal would have, in essence, pulled the rug out from under a lot of folks. That didn't happen, and that's good news. The wind industry was able to, beat that back. They had a lot of supporters in the Senate when that final bill came through. They still had the tax credit in the format that everybody had previously agreed to. On the solar side, same thing. They kept that. There was a $7,500 federal tax credit if you're in the market for a new electric vehicle. That is still available. It was pulled out at one point, put back in at a later date. And for the oil and gas industry, the bill also opened up new land for drilling in Alaska. It'll be interesting to see what happens with that.
On the 20% corporate tax rate, I think that would apply to businesses and not partnerships such as limited liability companies. So all the folks that are taxed at the corporate tax rate have had a tremendous cut. And I think, in addition to the prospect of the so-called trillions of dollars, which are in offshore profits, I think that the spending patterns will change. Because now you have a corporate tax rate which is lower than the personal income tax rate. And I can just, in my mind, imagine people running corporations buying more stuff because they say, well, if we buy more stuff, we'll pay less corporate tax. And maybe it's something that is good and useful for a business. And our economy is really dependent upon the consumer economy. So that's something that hasn't been written about. Maybe it's another article you can write about the burgeoning spending because of the changing of the buying habits of corporations.
Well, I think the ramifications of this overhaul will be felt for a number of years, and we'll be writing many, many stories.
You also wrote about the call before you dig system. What's going on there?
I did. Now, the call before you dig, I don't know if you've seen the advertisements, call 811, call
right.
before you dig. I think we've all seen them. And there's a push underway to update and to kind of tighten down on. And it crossed my path, unfortunately, due to Firestone.
Sure.
Firestone tragedy back in April of 2017 when a home exploded and killed 2 men, severely injured a woman, was caused by natural gas that was leaked from an active well through a line that was not supposed to be hooked up. They don't know I haven't heard how it was hooked up, got into the home exploded. And after that, there's been a lot of proposals on the table about what to do. The state scrambled and had everybody check their all the energy companies check their pipelines.
And that was a massive effort.
It was a massive effort. 120,000 sections of pipeline were checked across 2 months.
Right.
So this system will, in essence, ask energy companies to put their information into the database that already exists for 811 that everybody knows about, everybody calls about, and this is just going to have a lot more information and availability to the people who need it when they're digging.
Higher safety, I guess one of the beneficial results of the tragedy of Firestone is that there's greater safety. Denver Business Journal, if you want to subscribe, where do you go?
www.denverbusinessjournal.com, and those newsletters I talked about, they're free.
Please go to that. It's a great newspaper. We're lucky to have it.
Yes. Thank you so much, Cathy Proctor, for joining us today, and Peter Moore for hosting. And we want to thank you for helping us kick off this first year of 2018 here on Connect and Collaborate.
Thank you for having me.